They called me the code janitor behind my back, snickering whenever I walked past their desks with my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. What they didn't know was that every line of legacy code I cleaned up was teaching me secrets about their systems that would one day make me their boss. My name is Ruby Chen, and this is the story of how I turned workplace humiliation into the sweetest revenge of my career. Sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who ends up holding your future in their hands. If you enjoy stories of workplace justice and career transformation, make sure to subscribe for more incredible tales like this one. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? Walking into TechFlow Solutions that first morning in September, I clutched my new employee badge like a lifeline, the plastic still warm from the laminating machine. At 32, I was older than most entry-level hires, but my unconventional path into tech had taken me through community college night classes while working 3 jobs to support myself. The title on my badge read, Code Refactoring Intern, which sounds impressive until you realize it's essentially digital housekeeping, cleaning up messy code that other developers were too important to bother with. The office buzzed with the energy of a successful startup. Developers hunched over multiple monitors, their fingers dancing across mechanical keyboards that clicked like digital rain. Product managers rushed between conference rooms clutching tablets and looking perpetually stressed. Salespeople gestured enthusiastically into their headsets, closing deals that kept the lights on and the free snacks flowing. I was assigned to a corner desk in what everyone called the penalty box, a section reserved for interns, contractors, and anyone else who didn't quite belong to the core team. My supervisor, Derek Martinez, was a senior developer who'd been with the company since its early days. He had the casual arrogance of someone who'd never questioned his place in the hierarchy, wearing expensive sneakers and vintage band t-shirts that somehow cost more than my entire wardrobe. During our first meeting, he explained my role with the enthusiasm of someone describing garbage collection. Basically, Ruby, you'll be cleaning up legacy code, he said, not bothering to look up from his own screen where he was debugging what appeared to be a user authentication system. The stuff that works, but looks terrible. The code that nobody wants to touch because it's not sexy or innovative. Think of yourself as our digital janitor. He finally glanced at me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. It's important work, I guess. Someone has to do it. The other developers found this endlessly amusing. There was Marcus Webb, a 26-year-old prodigy who'd dropped out of Stanford to join TechFlow and never let anyone forget it. He had a habit of explaining basic concepts to me in the tone reserved for particularly slow children, despite the fact that I'd aced every technical assessment they'd given me. Then there was Brad Hoffman, the lead front-end developer who treated every conversation like a performance designed to showcase his superior intellect. "Hey, code janitor!" Marcus would call out when he needed someone to fetch coffee from the kitchen, as if my official job title wasn't demeaning enough. "While you're cleaning up our mess, mind grabbing us some caffeine? The real developers need to stay focused on important stuff." Brad would laugh from his standing desk, a piece of equipment he'd specifically requested because sitting was apparently for people who didn't take their careers seriously enough. "At least someone around here knows their place in the food chain," he'd add, never looking away from his dual monitors where he crafted what he considered digital masterpieces. The worst part wasn't the condescension or the casual dismissal of my contributions. It was the way they made me invisible during important conversations, talking around me as if I were furniture that happened to have opinions. During team meetings, I'd suggest improvements to the codebase based on patterns I'd noticed while refactoring, only to watch Derek nod politely and then ignore everything I'd said. 2 weeks later, Marcus would present the exact same ideas as his own revolutionary insights, receiving praise and recognition, while I sat in the corner, wondering if I'd imagined our previous conversation. They excluded me from team lunches, after-work drinks, and the informal networking sessions where real decisions got made and relationships were built. When clients visited the office, Derek would introduce the core team without mentioning that someone had spent weeks making their code functional and maintainable. I was support staff, background noise, the person who made everyone else look good while remaining perpetually invisible. But here's what they didn't understand about code refactoring. It's not just cleanup work. When you're tasked with making sense of messy, poorly documented systems, you develop an intimate understanding of how everything connects. You see the architectural decisions that seemed smart at the time, but created technical debt. You identify the bottlenecks that slow down the entire system. You discover the security vulnerabilities that lurk in hastily written functions. Most importantly, You learn to think systematically about problems that other developers only see in isolation. Every function I cleaned up taught me something about TechFlow's business logic. Every database query I optimized revealed insights about their data architecture. Every API endpoint I documented showed me how their systems communicated with external services. While Marcus and Brad focused on building new features, I was learning the foundational structure that made everything possible. I was becoming an expert in their entire technical ecosystem, one refactored function at a time. During my lunch breaks, I started a side project that began as a simple tool for tracking code quality metrics. I'd noticed that TechFlow, like most growing companies, had accumulated years of technical debt without any systematic way to measure or manage it. Developers would build features quickly to meet deadlines, promising to clean it up later, but never finding time for that cleanup. The result was a codebase that worked, but was increasingly difficult to maintain and extend. My tool started simple: a dashboard that could analyze any codebase and generate reports about code complexity, documentation coverage, testing gaps, and potential security issues. I built it using modern frameworks and cloud architecture patterns I'd been studying in my spare time, treating it as both a practical solution and a learning exercise. What started as a weekend project gradually evolved into something more sophisticated than anything TechFlow was using internally. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my colleagues dismissed me as a glorified code janitor, I was building technology that could revolutionize how companies managed their technical debt. While they saw refactoring as menial labor, I was developing expertise in code quality management that very few developers possessed. I was turning their contempt into my competitive advantage, using their disregard as motivation to become the expert they assumed I could never be. 6 months into my internship, the daily humiliations had crystallized into a routine that felt almost ritualistic in its predictability. Every morning, Marcus would make some comment about the code janitor clocking in for another day of digital housekeeping. Every afternoon, Brad would assign me tasks with the air of someone delegating chores to household staff. Every evening, Derek would review my work with the distracted attention of someone checking that the cleaning crew had done their job properly. But something was changing in the broader tech industry that none of them had noticed. Companies were finally starting to recognize that technical debt wasn't just an abstract concept. It was a real business liability that could slow down development, increase costs, and create security vulnerabilities. Forward-thinking organizations were investing in code-quality tools and processes, treating legacy system maintenance as strategic rather than janitorial work. My side project had evolved into something called Legacy Lift, a comprehensive platform for analyzing, documenting, and refactoring legacy codebases. What made it special wasn't just the technical analysis. Plenty of tools could identify problematic code. Legacy Lift provided automated refactoring suggestions, generated documentation for undocumented systems, and created migration plans for modernizing legacy architectures. It was the kind of tool that could save companies months of development time and millions of dollars in technical debt. I'd been working on Legacy Lift for over a year, spending evenings and weekends building features and testing them on sample code bases I found on GitHub. The platform was sophisticated enough to handle enterprise-scale applications, but I designed the interface to be accessible to non-technical stakeholders who needed to understand the business impact of code quality issues. It was, I realized, exactly what TechFlow needed, but didn't know how to ask for. The tipping point came during what Derek called Code Quality Week, a company-wide initiative designed to address the growing technical debt that was slowing down new feature development. Management had finally acknowledged that their rapid growth had come at the cost of maintainable code, and they wanted the development team to spend a week identifying and fixing the most critical issues. Derek assembled the team in the main conference room, its glass walls offering a view of the entire office where other departments continued their work, while the developers prepared for what everyone knew would be a frustrating week of arguing about priorities and pointing fingers about whose code was most problematic. "All right, everyone," Derek began, consulting a printed agenda that someone had clearly prepared for him. "Management wants us to tackle our technical debt situation. We need to identify the biggest problem areas, estimate the effort required to fix them, and present a plan for addressing these issues over the next quarter." Marcus immediately jumped in, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything. "The real problem is our database architecture. We're using an outdated ORM that can't handle our current scale. If we could just rebuild the data layer using modern tools, most of our performance issues would disappear." Brad nodded enthusiastically, already seeing an opportunity to work on something he considered worthy of his talents. Marcus is right, and while we're at it, we should modernize the front-end architecture. The current system is built on frameworks that are practically ancient by industry standards. A complete rewrite would solve most of our user experience problems. Derek looked pleased with their initiative, not noticing that they'd just proposed rebuilding the entire system from scratch, a project that would take years and cost millions while delivering no immediate business value. Those are great suggestions. What about you, Ruby? Any thoughts on our code quality issues? This was my moment. I'd been analyzing TechFlow's codebase for over a year, documenting every inefficiency and vulnerability while they focused on building new features. I understood their technical debt better than anyone in the room, and I had a tool that could prove it. Actually, I said, opening my laptop and connecting it to the conference room projector, I've been working on something that might help us approach this more systematically. The room fell silent as Legacy Lift's dashboard appeared on the main screen, displaying a comprehensive analysis of TechFlow's entire codebase. The interface was clean and professional, with visualizations that made complex technical metrics accessible to non-technical stakeholders. But what caught everyone's attention was the sheer depth of the analysis. Every module, every function, every potential improvement opportunity mapped out with precision they'd never seen before. This is Legacy Lift, I continued, clicking through different sections of the report. I've been using it to analyze our codebase over the past few months. It's identified over 300 specific refactoring opportunities, ranked by impact and effort required. Instead of rebuilding everything from scratch, we could address these issues systematically, starting with the changes that would provide the biggest performance improvements with the least development time. Marcus leaned forward, his casual arrogance replaced by something that looked like genuine interest. Wait, you built this? How did you get access to our entire codebase for analysis? I've been working with all of this code for the past year, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Every function I've refactored, every module I've documented, every performance issue I've fixed, it's all been feeding into this analysis. Legacy Lift doesn't just identify problems, it provides specific, actionable solutions. Brad was staring at the screen with an expression I'd never seen from him before, something that might have been respect, or at least acknowledgement that what he was seeing was impressive. How long did this take you to build? About 18 months, I admitted. It started as a simple side project, but it evolved into something more comprehensive as I realized how much technical debt we were accumulating. Derek was quiet for a long moment, scrolling through the detailed reports that Legacy Lift had generated. The tool had identified security vulnerabilities that their standard tools had missed, performance bottlenecks that were costing them thousands of dollars in server costs, and documentation gaps that were slowing down every new developer who joined the team. This is actually really impressive, Ruby, he said finally, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. I had no idea you were working on something like this. Why didn't you mention it before? Because you never asked, I thought. Because you made it clear that my opinions didn't matter. Because you treated me like furniture that occasionally made suggestions. But what I said was, I wanted to make sure it was comprehensive enough to be useful before presenting it to the team. The meeting continued for another hour, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of dismissing my contributions, Marcus and Brad were asking detailed technical questions about Legacy Lift's architecture and methodology. Derek was taking notes and asking about implementation timelines. For the first time since I'd started at TechFlow, they were treating me like a colleague rather than a subordinate. But even as I answered their questions and demonstrated features they hadn't initially noticed, I realized something important. Their respect was conditional and temporary. They were impressed by Legacy Lift because it solved problems they cared about, but they still saw me as the person who cleaned up their messes. The moment this project was over, I'd go back to being the code janitor who occasionally had useful ideas. That evening, I sat in my small apartment reviewing the events of the day and making a decision that would change everything. Legacy Lift wasn't just a side project anymore. It was a product with real market potential. And TechFlow wasn't the only company struggling with technical debt and legacy system management. If I could turn this tool into a business, I could escape the limitations of being someone else's employee and build something entirely my own. Over the following months, while continuing my day job at TechFlow, I began laying the groundwork for what would become Legacy Lift Solutions. I researched the market for code quality tools, identifying gaps that existing products didn't address. I connected with other developers who were facing similar challenges, gathering feedback about features that would make Legacy Lift more valuable to enterprise customers. Most importantly, I started building relationships with potential clients who were struggling with the same technical debt issues that TechFlow faced. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. Instead, it was the gradual accumulation of small victories and incremental improvements that eventually reached a tipping point. Every conversation with a potential customer taught me something about the market. Every feature I added to Legacy Lift made it more competitive with existing solutions. Every dollar I saved from my TechFlow salary went toward building a business that could eventually support me full-time. My colleagues remained oblivious to these developments. They continued treating me as the code janitor who'd gotten lucky with one impressive project, not realizing that their lucky break was actually the foundation of something much larger. They assumed that Legacy Lift would remain an internal tool that might eventually be integrated into TechFlow's development workflow, never imagining that I was planning to take it to market as a standalone product. The irony was perfect. While they dismissed my work as janitorial, I was building the exact solution their industry desperately needed. While they focused on writing new code, I was becoming an expert in managing the life cycle of existing systems. While they competed for recognition within TechFlow's hierarchy, I was creating a business that could disrupt the entire code quality management market. By my second year at TechFlow, the daily routine had become almost comfortable in its predictability. Marcus still made jokes about the code janitor, but they felt more like friendly ribbing than genuine hostility. Brad still assigned me the tasks he considered beneath his attention, but he occasionally asked for my input on technical decisions. Derek still treated me as a junior team member, but he'd started including me in more important conversations about system architecture and development priorities. Legacy Lift had been integrated into TechFlow's development workflow, where it was quietly revolutionizing how they managed code quality. The tool had identified and helped resolve dozens of performance issues, security vulnerabilities, and maintainability problems that would have taken months to address through traditional methods. Management was pleased with the improvements in code quality metrics, and Derek had received praise for implementing such an effective solution. What they didn't know was that I'd been using TechFlow as a beta testing environment for features I was developing for external clients. Every improvement I made to the internal version of Legacy Lift was also being refined for the commercial platform I was building in parallel. TechFlow was essentially funding the development of a product that would eventually compete with tools they might have built themselves, if they'd recognized the market opportunity. My evenings and weekends were consumed with building Legacy Lift solutions into a real business. I'd incorporated as an LLC, developed pricing models for different market segments, and created marketing materials that positioned the platform as an enterprise solution for technical debt management. Most importantly, I'd begun selling Legacy Lift to other companies, starting with small consulting contracts that gradually evolved into larger implementation projects. The first major client was a financial services company, whose legacy COBOL systems were becoming impossible to maintain as their original developers retired. Legacy Lift couldn't automatically refactor COBOL code, but it could analyze system dependencies, identify critical components, and generate documentation that would help their remaining developers understand what they were working with. The project was challenging and time-consuming, but it proved that Legacy Lift could handle enterprise-scale legacy systems that other tools couldn't touch. The second client was a healthcare technology company that needed to modernize their patient data management system to comply with new regulatory requirements. Legacy Lift identified security vulnerabilities and compliance gaps that their internal audits had missed, providing detailed remediation plans that saved them months of manual analysis. The success of this project led to referrals within the healthcare technology community, establishing Legacy Lift's reputation in a lucrative vertical market. Each new client taught me something about the broader market for legacy system management. I learned that technical debt wasn't just a problem for startups that had grown quickly. Established enterprises were struggling with systems that had accumulated decades of modifications and patches. Government agencies were dealing with mission-critical applications built on technologies that were no longer supported. Nonprofit organizations were maintaining databases and applications that worked, but couldn't be easily modified or extended. The market opportunity was enormous, and I was building exactly the right solution at exactly the right time. Companies were finally recognizing that technical debt was a strategic liability that required systematic management rather than ad hoc fixes. They needed tools that could analyze complex legacy systems, provide actionable insights, and support long-term modernization efforts. Legacy Lift was designed to address all of these needs, and the early customer feedback suggested I was on the right track. But success in the external market created a strange tension with my day job at TechFlow. I was spending my days as a code refactoring intern while my evenings were consumed with running a growing software business. I was helping TechFlow improve their code quality while simultaneously building a company that could potentially disrupt their entire industry. I was maintaining the facade of being their junior developer, while actually becoming their secret competitor. The cognitive dissonance became almost unbearable during team meetings where Derek would discuss Legacy Lift's impact on their development workflow, praising the tool's effectiveness while treating me as the person who operated it, rather than the person who'd created it. Marcus and Brad would suggest feature improvements that I'd already implemented in the commercial version, not realizing they were essentially providing product feedback for a competitor's offering. "You know, Ruby," Derek said during one particularly surreal conversation, "you've really become our Legacy Lift expert. Maybe we should consider making you the official administrator for the tool. It could be a nice addition to your responsibilities." I nodded and smiled, agreeing to take on additional responsibilities for managing a tool I'd built while planning my departure from the company that had provided the inspiration and testing environment for my business. The irony was so complete, it felt like performance art. The breaking point came during TechFlow's annual performance review cycle, when Derek sat me down for what he clearly expected to be a routine conversation about my professional development and career goals within the company. "You've done solid work this year, Ruby," he began, consulting the notes he'd prepared for our meeting. "Your code refactoring has been consistently high quality, and your work with Legacy Lift has been particularly valuable. I think you're ready for some additional responsibilities." He outlined a potential promotion to Senior Code Refactoring Specialist, a title that somehow managed to make my current position sound even less appealing. The role would include a modest salary increase and the opportunity to mentor future refactoring interns, but it was essentially the same work with slightly more prestige and responsibility. "We're also considering having you train new developers on Legacy Lift usage," Derek continued, apparently unaware that he was asking me to teach people how to use a tool I'd created. "Your expertise with the platform has been really impressive. I think you could help other team members get more value out of the system." I listened to his vision of my future at TechFlow, years of cleaning up other people's code, managing a tool I'd built but didn't officially own, training colleagues who would receive credit for innovations I'd developed in my spare time. It was a perfectly reasonable career path for someone who wanted stability and steady incremental progress within an established organization, but I wasn't that person anymore. Over the past 2 years, while they'd seen me as their reliable code janitor, I'd transformed into an entrepreneur, building a business that was already generating more revenue than my TechFlow salary. While they'd planned my future as a senior specialist in legacy code management, I'd been creating a company that could revolutionize how the entire industry approached technical debt. "I appreciate the offer, Derek," I said finally, choosing my words carefully, "but I've been thinking about some changes in my career direction. I'd like to give my 2 weeks' notice." The surprise on his face was genuine and complete. In his mind, I was someone who should be grateful for the opportunity to advance within TechFlow's hierarchy, not someone who might have alternatives worth pursuing. "Is this about money? Because we can probably adjust the salary offer if that's the issue." "It's not about money," I replied, which was true in ways he couldn't understand. "I've decided to pursue some other opportunities." Derek spent the next 20 minutes trying to understand my decision, asking about competing offers and career goals and whether there was anything TechFlow could do to retain me. I gave non-committal answers about wanting to explore new challenges, never mentioning that I was leaving to focus full-time on a business that was already competing with tools his company might have built. Marcus and Brad were equally puzzled by my departure, though their confusion was mixed with something that might have been relief. They'd grown accustomed to having a competent code janitor who occasionally provided useful insights, but they'd never seen me as a long-term colleague or potential peer. My leaving meant they wouldn't have to navigate the awkward dynamic of working with someone they'd consistently underestimated. My last day at TechFlow was remarkably ordinary. I cleaned out my desk in the penalty box, transferring files and documenting processes for whoever would inherit my responsibilities. Derek walked me through an exit interview that focused on suggestions for improving the intern program and maintaining institutional knowledge about Legacy Lift usage. No one asked where I was going or what I planned to do next, apparently assuming I was transitioning to a similar role at another company. As I walked out of the office for the final time, carrying a cardboard box with the few personal items I'd accumulated over 2 years, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation that I hadn't expected. I was leaving behind the daily humiliations and casual dismissals that had defined my experience at TechFlow, but I was also abandoning the security of a steady paycheck and predictable routine. What lay ahead was uncertain, but entirely under my control. Legacy Lift Solutions was generating enough revenue to support me, but growing the business would require the kind of focused attention I couldn't provide while working full-time for someone else. I was trading the safety of employment for the risk and potential reward of entrepreneurship, leaving behind the identity of someone who cleaned up other people's messes to become someone who built solutions for an entire industry. The transition from TechFlow employee to full-time entrepreneur was more challenging than I'd anticipated. Without the structure of a day job, I had to create my own routines and discipline around business development, product improvement, and customer support. The steady paycheck was replaced by the irregular revenue streams of a growing consulting business, requiring careful financial planning and constant attention to cash flow management. But the freedom was intoxicating. For the first time in my career, I could focus entirely on work that I found meaningful and challenging. Every hour I spent improving Legacy Lift was an investment in my own business, rather than someone else's success. Every client conversation was an opportunity to learn about market needs and refine my product offering. Every technical challenge was a chance to build expertise that would directly benefit my own company. Legacy Lift Solutions grew steadily over the following months, adding new clients and expanding into market segments I hadn't initially considered. Manufacturing companies needed help modernizing industrial control systems. Educational institutions were struggling with student information systems built decades earlier. Even government agencies were beginning to recognize that their legacy technology infrastructure required systematic management rather than crisis-driven maintenance. Each new client brought different challenges and requirements, forcing me to continuously improve Legacy Lift's capabilities and develop specialized solutions for different industries and use cases. What had started as a simple code quality analysis tool evolved into a comprehensive platform for legacy system management, offering everything from automated documentation generation to migration planning and modernization roadmaps. The business was becoming profitable enough to hire additional developers and expand beyond what I could accomplish working alone. I brought on contractors to help with specific client projects, gradually building a network of specialists who understood legacy system challenges and could implement Legacy Lift solutions at scale. What had begun as a solo consulting practice was evolving into a real technology company with employees, processes, and the kind of systematic growth that could eventually challenge established players in the market. 3 years after leaving TechFlow, I received an email that would bring my journey full circle in ways I never could have anticipated. A business development representative from a private equity firm was reaching out about potential acquisition opportunities in the code quality management space. Their portfolio company, TechFlow Solutions, was looking to expand their product offerings through strategic acquisitions, and Legacy Lift had been identified as a potential target. The irony was so perfect, it felt like the universe had a sense of humor. The company that had dismissed me as a code janitor was now interested in acquiring the business I'd built while working as their code janitor. The colleagues who'd never seen me as a peer were now potential employees of a company I'd founded and grown into a market leader. I agreed to an initial conversation, curious to learn how TechFlow had evolved since my departure and whether they'd recognize the connection between their former intern and the CEO of the company they wanted to acquire. The private equity representative, a sharp woman named Susan Reynolds, explained that TechFlow was struggling with increased competition and needed to diversify their product portfolio to maintain growth. They've been particularly interested in legacy system management tools, Susan explained during our video call. Apparently, they had some early experience with a platform called Legacy Lift that showed promising results, but they haven't been able to develop anything comparable internally. Acquiring an established player in that market could give them a significant competitive advantage. I listened to her description of TechFlow's strategic needs and market position, gathering intelligence about the company I'd left 3 years earlier. According to Susan, they'd grown significantly, but were facing challenges from newer competitors who offered more modern development tools and methodologies. Their legacy codebase had become increasingly difficult to maintain, and they were struggling with the same technical debt issues that Legacy Lift was designed to address. The acquisition would be structured as a combination of cash and equity, Susan continued, outlining terms that were far more generous than I'd expected. TechFlow's leadership team is particularly interested in retaining LegacyLift's founder and development team. They recognize that domain expertise in legacy system management is difficult to replicate. The proposal was attractive from a purely financial perspective, offering immediate liquidity and the opportunity to scale LegacyLift's impact through TechFlow's established customer base and distribution channels. But the personal dimension of the deal created complications that Susan couldn't possibly understand. How do you explain to a private equity professional that you're being asked to sell your company to former colleagues who'd treated you as furniture? I asked for time to consider the proposal, promising to provide an answer within 2 weeks. The decision wasn't really about money or strategic fit. LegacyLift was successful enough that I didn't need to sell, and I'd built the business specifically to maintain independence and control over its direction. The real question was whether I wanted to return to TechFlow in a position of power, or whether doing so would feel like regression rather than triumph. Over the following days, I found myself researching TechFlow's current team composition and market position, trying to understand how the company had changed since my departure. Derek was still there, now promoted to VP of Engineering. Marcus had left to join a startup that had subsequently failed, while Brad had been promoted to lead architect. The company had grown to over 200 employees and expanded into new market segments, but they were struggling with the same code quality issues that had plagued them during my internship. The more I learned about their current challenges, the more I realized that acquiring LegacyLift would solve multiple problems for TechFlow, while creating an opportunity for me to demonstrate just how much they'd underestimated their former code janitor. If I structured the deal correctly, I could return not as an employee or consultant, but as the leader of a new division with authority over the technical decisions that had once been made without consulting me. After careful consideration and consultation with my business attorney, I decided to move forward with the acquisition discussions, but with specific terms that would position me as an equal partner rather than a subordinate. I would join TechFlow as Chief Technology Officer of the newly formed Legacy Systems Division, with full autonomy over product development and strategic direction. LegacyLift would maintain its brand identity and customer relationships, operating as a semi-independent business unit within TechFlow's broader organization. The negotiation process took several months, involving multiple rounds of due diligence, financial analysis, and strategic planning sessions. Throughout these discussions, I maintained my professional demeanor while internally savoring the irony that my former colleagues were now dependent on my expertise and goodwill for their company's future success. The final deal was structured as a stock-for-stock transaction that gave me significant equity in the combined entity while allowing me to maintain control over LegacyLift's development and market strategy. More importantly, my new role as CTO would give me authority over all technical decisions at TechFlow, effectively making me the boss of people who'd once made jokes about my job title. When the acquisition was announced internally at TechFlow, the reaction was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Derek was supportive but clearly uncomfortable with the sudden reversal of our professional relationship. The other developers were professional but subdued, apparently unsure how to interact with someone they'd previously dismissed, who was now their technical leader. My first day back at TechFlow, now as Chief Technology Officer rather than code refactoring intern, felt like stepping into an alternate reality where everything was familiar, but fundamentally different. The office layout was the same, but I now had a corner office with windows instead of a desk in the penalty box. The conference rooms were unchanged, but I was now leading meetings rather than sitting silently while others made decisions. The most surreal moment came during my first all-hands engineering meeting, when I stood before the entire development team to outline my vision for TechFlow's technical strategy. Derek sat in the front row, taking notes like an attentive student. Marcus's replacement, a young developer who'd clearly been briefed about my background, listened intently while asking thoughtful questions about implementation timelines. "I know this transition might feel unusual," I said, addressing the elephant in the room with characteristic directness. "Some of you remember me from my previous role here, and you might be wondering how someone who used to refactor your code is now making strategic technical decisions for the entire company." I paused, making eye contact with Derek and the other veterans who'd been present during my first tenure at TechFlow. The truth is that code refactoring taught me things about system architecture and technical debt management that you can't learn from building features or designing user interfaces. Understanding how systems break down over time, how small decisions compound into major problems, and how to systematically improve existing code, those skills turn out to be exactly what growing technology companies need most. The presentation continued for another hour, during which I outlined plans for modernizing TechFlow's development processes, implementing comprehensive code quality management, and leveraging LegacyLift's capabilities to address the technical debt that had accumulated since my departure. But the real message was contained in that opening acknowledgement. The person you dismissed as a code janitor had become the expert you needed most, and the skills you thought were menial had actually been the foundation of strategic thinking about technology management. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. Establishing credibility as a technical leader required demonstrating competence through actions rather than just presentations. Over the following months, I systematically addressed the performance issues, security vulnerabilities, and maintainability problems that were constraining TechFlow's growth, using insights I'd developed during my previous role but couldn't implement due to my limited authority. Derek adapted to our new relationship with the professionalism I'd expected, though I could sense his discomfort with reporting to someone he'd once supervised. During our weekly one-on-one meetings, he was respectful and collaborative, asking thoughtful questions about technical priorities and implementation strategies. But there was an underlying tension that came from the complete reversal of our previous dynamic. "I have to admit," he said during one of our early meetings, "I didn't fully appreciate what you were accomplishing during your first time here. Looking back, I think we could have done a better job of recognizing your contributions and involving you in strategic decisions." It was as close to an apology as I was likely to receive, and I appreciated his willingness to acknowledge past mistakes. "Water under the bridge," I replied, meaning it. "What matters now is building the best possible technology organization. That requires everyone contributing their strengths, regardless of what happened before." The other developers took longer to adjust, but their respect grew as they saw the tangible improvements that resulted from systematic attention to code quality and technical debt management. Performance issues that had persisted for months were resolved within weeks. Security vulnerabilities that had been theoretical concerns became concrete remediation projects with clear timelines and measurable outcomes. Most importantly, the development process became more efficient and predictable, as we eliminated the friction caused by poor code quality and inadequate documentation. New features could be implemented faster because the underlying systems were well understood and properly maintained. Bug fixes no longer created unexpected side effects because the code base was comprehensively tested and documented. Within 6 months of the acquisition, TechFlow's development velocity had improved by over 40%. Customer satisfaction scores had increased significantly, and the technical team was reporting higher job satisfaction due to reduced frustration with legacy system maintenance. The transformation validated everything I'd believed about the strategic importance of code quality management, proving that what my former colleagues had dismissed as janitorial work was actually the foundation of sustainable software development. A year after returning to TechFlow as CTO, I was invited to speak at TechCrunch Disrupt about the future of legacy system management. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of entrepreneurs, investors, and technology leaders, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from code refactoring intern to industry thought leader. The presentation went well, focusing on how companies could transform technical debt from a liability into a competitive advantage through systematic management and strategic modernization. During the Q&A session, a venture capitalist asked about my background and how I'd developed expertise in such a specialized field. "I started as a code refactoring intern," I said, smiling at the memory of those early days when that title had felt like a limitation rather than an opportunity. My colleagues used to call me the code janitor, and honestly, that wasn't entirely inaccurate. I was cleaning up messes that other people had created, making their code more maintainable and efficient. The audience laughed, assuming I was making a self-deprecating joke about humble beginnings, but I continued with complete sincerity. What I learned was that understanding how systems degrade over time and developing systematic approaches to improvement is actually one of the most valuable skills in software development. The person who cleans up the mess understands the architecture better than the person who created it. After the conference, Derek approached me at the networking reception, holding 2 glasses of wine and wearing an expression I'd never seen during our previous working relationship, something that looked like genuine respect, mixed with a healthy dose of humility. "That was an incredible presentation, Ruby," he said, handing me one of the glasses. "I keep thinking about what you said regarding understanding systems through maintenance rather than creation. It's making me reconsider a lot of assumptions about how we evaluate and develop talent. We talked for over an hour about technical leadership, career development, and the importance of recognizing expertise wherever it emerges within an organization. Derek acknowledged that TechFlow's culture had been too focused on innovation at the expense of maintenance, too quick to dismiss work that didn't fit traditional definitions of prestige or advancement. "I've been thinking about our early interactions," he admitted as the reception was winding down. "I treated you like someone who was lucky to have any job in tech, rather than someone who might have insights worth listening to. That was a failure of leadership on my part, and I'm sorry it took your dramatic success for me to recognize it." His apology felt genuine and complete, addressing not just the specific slights I'd experienced, but the broader cultural issues that had made them possible. More importantly, it represented a level of self-reflection and professional growth that suggested our current working relationship could be built on mutual respect rather than historical grievances. The success of Legacy Lift within TechFlow's ecosystem had attracted attention from other technology companies facing similar challenges. We began licensing the platform to external clients, creating a new revenue stream that leveraged TechFlow's established sales and marketing capabilities while maintaining Legacy Lift's technical independence and innovation trajectory. Within 2 years of the acquisition, the Legacy Systems division had become TechFlow's fastest-growing business unit, generating over $50 million in annual revenue and establishing the company as a market leader in code quality management. The success validated my decision to structure the deal as a partnership rather than a simple acquisition, maintaining control over product development while gaining access to resources and distribution channels that would have taken years to develop independently. But the real satisfaction came from transforming how TechFlow approached technical talent and career development. We implemented mentorship programs that paired senior developers with junior team members, regardless of their official titles or responsibilities. We created advancement paths that recognized expertise in system maintenance and code quality management as equally valuable to feature development and architectural design. Most importantly, we established a culture where every team member's contributions were evaluated based on their impact and expertise, rather than their position in traditional hierarchies. The code janitor jokes became a source of pride rather than embarrassment, representing the kind of systematic thinking and attention to detail that distinguished TechFlow's engineering culture from their competitors. 3 years after my return, Marcus Webb rejoined the company in a senior developer role, his previous startup having failed due to technical debt issues that Legacy Lift could have prevented. During his interview process, he specifically mentioned wanting to work in an environment where code quality was treated as a strategic priority rather than an afterthought. "I've learned the hard way that building fast isn't the same as building sustainably," he said during our conversation about his potential role on the team. "The company I just left failed because we accumulated technical debt faster than we could manage it. I want to work somewhere that has figured out how to balance innovation with maintainability." I hired him as a senior developer on the Legacy Systems team, where his experience with rapid feature development complemented the systematic approach to code quality that defined our division. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The person he'd once dismissed as a code janitor was now his manager, and the skills he'd considered menial were now the foundation of his career recovery. Working with Marcus in this new dynamic was surprisingly positive. He brought energy and creativity to legacy system modernization projects, while I provided the strategic framework and technical expertise that prevented those projects from creating new technical debt. Our collaboration proved that professional relationships could evolve beyond their original limitations when both parties were committed to growth and mutual respect. The transformation of TechFlow's engineering culture attracted attention from industry publications and conference organizers, establishing the company as a thought leader in sustainable software development practices. I was invited to speak at major technology conferences, write articles for prominent industry publications, and serve on advisory boards for companies facing similar technical debt challenges. Each speaking opportunity reinforced the central message that had emerged from my journey. Expertise can develop in unexpected places, and organizations that fail to recognize talent wherever it appears will consistently underperform competitors who create more inclusive and meritocratic cultures. The code refactoring work that had once been dismissed as janitorial had taught me to think systematically about complex problems, to see patterns that others missed, and to develop comprehensive solutions rather than quick fixes. These skills proved invaluable in technical leadership roles, where the ability to understand how decisions compound over time is often more important than the ability to implement individual features quickly. 5 years after leaving TechFlow as a dismissed intern and returning as Chief Technology Officer, I received a LinkedIn message that brought my story full circle in the most satisfying way possible. A young woman named Sarah Kim was reaching out about a code refactoring internship at TechFlow, having heard that we had developed an innovative approach to legacy system management and career development. "I know that code refactoring isn't considered the most glamorous work in software development," she wrote, "but I'm interested in understanding how systems evolve over time and how to make existing code more maintainable and efficient. I've heard that TechFlow treats this kind of work as strategically important rather than just cleanup duty." I scheduled a video call with Sarah, eager to meet someone who understood instinctively what had taken me years to articulate. During our conversation, she demonstrated exactly the kind of systematic thinking and attention to detail that had served me so well throughout my career, along with a humility and curiosity that suggested she could develop into an exceptional technical leader. "Code refactoring is absolutely strategic work," I told her during our interview. "The person who understands why systems break down and how to fix them systematically will always be valuable, regardless of what their official title happens to be. If you're willing to learn from every line of code you touch, this role could be the foundation of an incredible career." I hired Sarah as our new code refactoring intern, assigning her to work directly with the legacy systems team where she could learn not just the technical aspects of system maintenance, but also the business strategy and leadership skills that would serve her throughout her career. Unlike my own experience as an intern, Sarah would be treated as a valued team member whose insights and contributions were actively sought and recognized. Her first week at TechFlow, I took her to lunch at the same restaurant where Derek had once outlined my responsibilities as the company's digital janitor. But instead of explaining limitations and hierarchies, I shared the story of how systematic attention to code quality had transformed both my career and TechFlow's technical culture. "The people who think code refactoring is menial work don't understand that you're actually becoming an expert in the most important aspects of software development," I explained as we reviewed her first week's accomplishments. "You're learning how systems really work, not just how they're supposed to work. That knowledge will make you invaluable to any organization that takes software quality seriously." Sarah listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions about technical debt management and career development strategies. Her enthusiasm reminded me of my own excitement during those early days when I was discovering that every refactored function was teaching me something important about system architecture and business logic. 6 months later, Sarah had already identified several critical performance improvements that our senior developers had missed, proving once again that expertise in legacy system management could develop quickly when supported by the right mentorship and organizational culture. Her success validated everything we'd built at TechFlow, demonstrating that talent could emerge from unexpected places when given proper recognition and development opportunities. The cycle was beginning again, but with a crucial difference. This time, the intern's contributions were immediately recognized and valued. Sarah wouldn't have to spend years proving her worth or building a side business to demonstrate her capabilities. She could focus on developing her skills within an organization that understood the strategic value of code quality management from day one. Looking back on my journey from dismissed intern to industry leader, I'm struck by how completely my perspective on career development and professional success has evolved. The humiliation and frustration I experienced during my first tenure at TechFlow had felt like barriers to overcome, but they actually became the foundation of insights that distinguished my approach to technical leadership. The colleagues who dismissed me as a code janitor weren't intentionally cruel. They were operating within a cultural framework that valued certain types of work over others, failing to recognize that expertise could develop in roles they considered support functions. Their treatment of me reflected broader industry biases that limited innovation and competitive advantage by creating artificial hierarchies based on prestige rather than impact. My success didn't come from proving them wrong about my individual capabilities, but from demonstrating that their entire framework for evaluating talent and technical contributions was flawed. Code refactoring wasn't menial work. It was strategic analysis that provided insights unavailable through any other approach. Legacy system management wasn't cleanup duty. It was the foundation of sustainable software development that enabled long-term competitive advantage. The transformation of TechFlow's engineering culture, the success of Legacy Lift as a product and business, and the recognition I've received as a thought leader in technical debt management all validate a simple but powerful principle. Organizations that recognize and develop talent wherever it appears will consistently outperform competitors that maintain rigid hierarchies and traditional definitions of prestige. Today, When young developers ask me about career advice and professional development strategies, I tell them that the most valuable skills often develop in roles that others consider stepping stones or temporary positions. The person who understands maintenance learns architecture. The person who fixes problems learns prevention. The person who cleans up messes learns systematic thinking that prevents future messes. Most importantly, I tell them that respect and recognition are earned through consistent excellence and strategic thinking, not through titles or organizational hierarchies. The code janitor who solves systematic problems will eventually become the leader, while the senior developer who only builds features without considering long-term maintenance will remain trapped in execution roles. The title on my business cards now reads Chief Technology Officer, but I'm prouder of being called the code janitor who became the boss. It represents a journey that transformed professional humiliation into competitive advantage, proving that expertise can emerge from the most unexpected places when supported by persistence, strategic thinking, and the courage to build something entirely new. Every day at TechFlow, I'm reminded that the best revenge against people who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's building something so valuable that they have no choice but to recognize your expertise and ask for your leadership. Sometimes the person cleaning up the mess is actually the person who understands the system best, and sometimes the code janitor is exactly the leader your organization needs most.